In the vast expanse of the galaxy, where alien civilizations measure worth by the sharpness of claws, the thickness of armor, and the thunder of war cries, humanity sent their most unlikely ambassador. She arrived with soft words, gentle smiles, and hands that had never held a weapon. The Galactic Council saw weakness. The warrior races saw prey. The ancient empires saw an opportunity to finally crush the upstart human species. They were all catastrophically wrong. What they didn't know was that the deadliest predator often wears the face of innocence, and that humanity's greatest weapon had always been their ability to surprise. In a universe that respected only strength, they were about to learn that strength comes in forms they never imagined, and that underestimating a human, especially one who chooses kindness over violence, is the last mistake any species ever makes. The tender girl they dismissed would soon remind the galaxy why Earth's children are called the most dangerous beings in the universe. Not because they love war, but because they excel at it when they have no other choice. The massive docking bay of the Galactic Council station hummed with nervous energy as species from across the galaxy gathered to witness humanity's first formal diplomatic mission. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stepped off the human transport ship with the grace of someone completely unaware that she was walking into what most considered a death trap. At barely 5 feet tall, with auburn hair pulled back in a simple bun and wearing a modest blue diplomatic uniform, she looked more like a teacher than a representative of one of the galaxy's newest and most controversial species. Her escort consisted of only 2 other humans, a quiet aide named Marcus and a stone-faced security officer named Captain Rodriguez, who looked perpetually uncomfortable in his dress uniform rather than combat gear. The reception committee was an intimidating sight. The Zephyrian ambassador towered over them at nearly 8 feet, his chitinous exoskeleton gleaming under the station's harsh lights. Beside him stood General Korthak of the Saurian Empire, his scaled hide scarred from countless battles, with ceremonial bone spikes jutting from his shoulders. The crystalline form of the Nexus Collective representative pulsed with cold, calculating light. Elena approached them with a warm smile that seemed to catch everyone off guard. Honored representatives, thank you for welcoming humanity to this historic gathering. I'm Elena Vasquez, and I'm genuinely excited to begin building relationships between our peoples. The Zephyrian ambassador's compound eyes fixed on her with what could charitably be called contempt. You are smaller than expected, human. Are you certain your leaders sent the correct representative? Elena's smile never wavered. I understand the confusion. Many species judge capability by size or apparent strength. Humans have learned that understanding and compassion often accomplish more than intimidation. General Korthak's laugh was a harsh, grating sound. Compassion? You speak of weakness as if it were virtue. The galaxy respects only power, little human. Your species survived first contact through luck alone. Perhaps, Elena replied thoughtfully, but we're here now, and I believe that's what matters most. The next several hours were a masterclass in diplomatic patience. Elena was led through the station's various sectors, each designed to showcase the military might and technological superiority of different species. The Saurian War Museum displayed weapons that could level continents. The Zephyrian collective chambers demonstrated hive mind coordination that could control entire star systems. The Nexus Collective's computational cores processed tactical scenarios involving the destruction of thousands of worlds. Throughout it all, Elena asked thoughtful questions, took careful notes, and maintained her gentle demeanor. She admired their achievements, acknowledged their strength, and never once rose to the obvious baiting and casual insults directed at humanity. Tell me, she said to a group of junior military officers from various species, how do your peoples approach conflict resolution when both sides believe they're in the right? The question sparked a heated debate among the officers, with each species advocating for their particular form of superiority-based resolution. The Saurians favored single combat between champions. The Zephyrians preferred overwhelming numerical assault. The Nexus Collective calculated probability matrices until one side submitted to mathematical inevitability. Elena listened to each perspective with genuine interest. Those are all fascinating approaches. On Earth, we found that sometimes the most effective solution comes from finding what both sides actually need rather than what they think they want. A young Zephyrian officer clicked her mandibles dismissively. Naive human philosophy. Need is irrelevant. Only strength determines outcome. You might be right, Elena acknowledged. Though I've noticed that strength can mean different things to different people. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent announcement echoing through the station. All diplomatic personnel were to report to the main assembly chamber immediately. There had been what the announcement called a development of significant concern. The assembly chamber was a vast amphitheater designed to accommodate hundreds of species in various atmospheric conditions. Force fields maintained different environmental zones while allowing communication through universal translators. Elena found herself in the human delegation section, which was notably isolated from the other groups. High Chancellor Vex of the Galactic Council rose to address the assembly. His species, the Dominion, were ancient manipulators who had managed to position themselves as neutral arbiters despite their obvious agenda of maintaining the status quo that kept them in power. Esteemed delegates, Chancellor Vex began, his voice carrying the weight of authority developed over millennia. We have received disturbing intelligence regarding pirate activities in the Outer Rim territories. A coalition of criminal organizations has declared their intention to disrupt this diplomatic gathering and demonstrate their power by attacking Council assets. Murmurs of concern rippled through the assembly. Pirate raids were common enough, but an organized assault on Council facilities was unprecedented. Furthermore, the Chancellor continued, intelligence suggests these pirates have acquired advanced weaponry from unknown sources. Their capabilities may exceed our current defensive estimates. General Korthak stood immediately. The Saurian Empire's fleet stands ready to crush these criminals. Grant us jurisdiction and they will trouble the galaxy no more. The Zephyrian ambassador's harmonized voice joined the discussion. The collective's computational power can predict their likely attack vectors and optimize defensive positions for maximum efficiency. Elena raised her hand politely. If I may, Chancellor Vex, has anyone attempted to determine what these pirates actually want? Sometimes what appears to be random violence has underlying motivations that might be addressed through negotiation. The chamber fell silent for a moment before erupting in what could only be described as condescending laughter. Several species transmitted sounds that their translators rendered as various forms of amusement and disbelief. The human suggests negotiating with pirates, General Korthak announced to the assembly. Perhaps she would like to offer them tea and sympathy as well. Even Chancellor Vex allowed what passed for a smile among his species. Ambassador Vasquez, while we appreciate humanity's optimistic perspective, this situation requires proven military solutions, not experimental social theories. Elena nodded graciously. Of course, Chancellor. I'm sure the Council's military expertise will handle the situation appropriately. Though if I might suggest, perhaps humanity could assist with evacuation procedures or medical support? We're quite good at helping people in crisis situations. The offer was accepted with the sort of patronizing gratitude typically reserved for children who wanted to help with adult work. Elena was assigned to coordinate refugee assistance in the station's civilian sectors, well away from any actual decision-making. As the assembly dispersed to prepare for potential conflict, Elena walked quietly through the station's corridors with Marcus and Captain Rodriguez. The other species barely acknowledged their presence, too focused on their own preparations for glory and military distinction. Ma'am, Captain Rodriguez said quietly, are you sure about this approach? We could request a military escort from Earth. Admiral Chen's battle group is only 3 days away. Elena smiled at him with the same warmth she'd shown everyone else. Thank you, Captain, but I think we should trust the Council's capabilities. After all, they've been managing galactic security for thousands of years. Marcus glanced around nervously. But, Elena, what if the pirates actually attack? This station is massive, but it's not exactly designed for siege warfare. Then, we'll do what humans do best, Elena replied calmly. We'll help where we're needed most. What none of them mentioned, and what the sophisticated surveillance systems of the various species somehow failed to detect, was the subtle hand signals Captain Rodriguez had been making throughout their conversation. Signals that confirmed their communications were being monitored, their quarters were certainly bugged, and their every movement was being tracked by multiple intelligence agencies. They also failed to detect the almost imperceptible response signals Elena had been giving, signals that indicated she was not only aware of the surveillance but was counting on it. As evening fell across the station's artificial day cycle, Elena sat in her modest quarters reviewing diplomatic protocols and writing what appeared to be routine reports back to Earth. She seemed every bit the overwhelmed academic trying to navigate her first major assignment. In reality, she was doing something the galaxy's most sophisticated intelligence networks couldn't imagine. She was thinking several moves ahead in a game where everyone else believed they were the only players who mattered. The pirates, when they came, would find exactly what they expected to find. A space station full of proud warrior races preparing for glorious battle, defended by species that measured worth in firepower and honor in victory. They would see humanity's representative cowering in the civilian sectors, tending to refugees and staying safely away from the real action. They would be as wrong as everyone else about what Elena Vasquez represented. But they wouldn't stay wrong for very long. The attack began at 0347 station time, during the quiet hours when most species were in their rest cycles. Elena was not asleep. She sat in the Civilian Coordination Center, ostensibly reviewing evacuation procedures, when the first alarms began to sound. The pirate fleet emerged from hyperspace in a coordinated assault that immediately demonstrated they were far more organized and well-equipped than anyone had anticipated. 47 ships of various configurations, from nimble fighters to massive dreadnoughts that shouldn't have been in criminal hands, surrounded the station with military precision. Within minutes, the station's defensive systems were under assault from multiple vectors. The pirates weren't just attacking, they were systematically dismantling the Council's defenses with a sophistication that suggested extensive inside knowledge. In the military command center, General Korthak roared orders at his subordinates while displays showed his defensive positions being overrun with embarrassing efficiency. How are they bypassing our shield matrices? These criminals fight like a trained military force. The Zephyrian Collective was equally frustrated as their computational predictions proved worthless against an enemy that seemed to anticipate their every tactical adjustment. The Nexus Collective's crystalline forms pulsed with agitated light as their probability calculations collapsed into chaos. Chancellor Vex's voice echoed through the station's communication system, all military personnel to defensive positions. Civilian evacuations are to proceed to designated safe zones immediately. Elena stood calmly as panicked beings of dozens of species flooded into the civilian sectors. Children of various species cried in frequencies that universal translators could barely process. Parents clutched offspring with appendages ranging from tentacles to claws. The elderly and injured moved as quickly as their various physiologies allowed. Marcus, begin organizing them by atmospheric requirements, Elena instructed her aide. Captain Rodriguez, I need you to coordinate with station security for perimeter establishment around the safe zones. As chaos erupted around them, Elena moved through the crowds with the kind of calm competence that made people instinctively look to her for guidance. She helped a Nexus Collective family whose crystalline child had been damaged by falling debris, her hands steady as she applied emergency field stabilizers. She organized Zephyrian younglings whose collective link to their parents had been disrupted by the station's damaged communication systems. Ambassador Vasquez called a panicked Saurian administrator, the evacuation pods in Section C aren't responding to launch commands. There are 43 civilians trapped there. Elena looked up from where she was helping tend to an injured Dominion elder. Captain Rodriguez and I will handle it. Marcus, continue coordinating here. The journey to Section C required moving through parts of the station that were actively under attack. Elena and Captain Rodriguez made their way through corridors filled with the sounds of distant explosions and the occasional flash of weapons fire from the exterior viewports. Ma'am, Rodriguez said quietly as they moved, permission to speak freely? Always, Captain. This attack is too sophisticated for random pirates. Someone gave them detailed intelligence about station defenses, patrol schedules, even the locations of critical systems. Elena nodded thoughtfully. What does your tactical assessment suggest about their ultimate objectives? They're not trying to destroy the station, Rodriguez replied after a moment. They're isolating it. Cutting communications, disabling defensive systems, but preserving the structure itself. This feels like a capture operation. They reached Section C to find exactly what the administrator had reported. 43 civilians of various species huddled in the evacuation area where the pod bay doors refused to open. The manual override controls had been damaged in the initial attack. Elena examined the control panel with the sort of focused attention that suggested more technical knowledge than a typical diplomat would possess. The primary control circuits are intact, but the safety interlocks are preventing launch because the bay doors won't open. "Can you fix it?" asked a frightened Nexus Collective representative, her crystalline form flickering with anxiety. "Maybe," Elena replied, pulling an emergency toolkit from her diplomatic bag. "Though I should mention this will require disabling several safety systems. Once I start this process, those bay doors will open whether there's atmosphere on the other side or not." She worked quickly but methodically, her hands moving with the precision of someone who had done emergency repairs under pressure many times before. Within minutes, she had bypassed the damaged circuits and jury-rigged a manual control system. "Everyone into the pods now," she instructed. "Captain Rodriguez will help coordinate the launch sequence." As the civilians loaded into escape pods, Elena moved to the bay control station. Her fingers danced across the emergency controls with the kind of muscle memory that came from extensive training. The bay doors opened with a grinding mechanical protest, revealing the star field beyond where pirate fighters streaked past in attack patterns. Elena initiated the pod launch sequence, sending 43 beings to safety while explosions lit up space around the station. "Ambassador," Rodriguez said quietly, "we should return to the safe zones." Elena was studying the tactical displays that showed the ongoing battle. The station's defenses were failing systematically. The proud warrior races that had dismissed humanity's diplomatic approach were being systematically outfought by an enemy they had underestimated. "Captain, in your professional opinion, how long before the pirates breach the station's main defensive perimeter?" Rodriguez consulted his tactical scanner. "At current engagement rates, maybe 90 minutes. The Saurian heavy weapons are impressive but they're fighting defensive actions. The Zephyrian collective tactics aren't adapting fast enough to the pirates' coordination patterns. And, once they breach? Station-to-station combat favors the attackers. The Council forces are trained for space combat, not corridor fighting in civilian-populated areas." Elena nodded slowly. "Then, we'd better get back to the civilian sectors. People are going to need help very soon." They made their way back through corridors that now echoed with the sounds of closer combat. Emergency lighting cast everything in ominous red shadows. Occasional groups of military personnel rushed past them toward defensive positions. When they reached the main civilian coordination area, Elena found Marcus managing a situation that had grown considerably more complex. Hundreds of additional refugees had arrived as outer sections of the station were evacuated. Species that rarely interacted peacefully under normal circumstances were now crowded together in stress-inducing proximity. "Elena," Marcus called out, "we've got 3 separate brewing conflicts here. The Saurian military families are demanding priority evacuation status. A group of Nexus Collective civilians are claiming their computational needs require special atmospheric considerations. And, the Zephyrian younglings are becoming distressed because they can't establish collective link in this environment." Elena surveyed the situation with the kind of calm assessment that made people around her feel more secure. "Has anyone attempted to organize them into mixed-species work groups?" Marcus looked confused. "Work groups? People handle stress better when they have purpose," Elena explained. "The Saurians' natural leadership instincts could help organize evacuation priorities. The Nexus Collective's computational abilities could optimize resource distribution. The Zephyrian Collective link, if we can boost the local communication systems, could coordinate information flow." Over the next hour, Elena moved through the refugee population with the kind of diplomatic skill that transformed panic into purposeful activity. She convinced a group of Saurian officers to organize evacuation queues based on medical need rather than species hierarchy. She helped Nexus Collective engineers calculate optimal resource distribution algorithms. She worked with Zephyrian technicians to establish temporary collective link networks that helped their younglings feel connected. What she didn't mention to anyone was that she was also conducting a detailed tactical assessment of everything she observed. The number and types of civilian refugees indicated which sections of the station had been abandoned first. The timing of military personnel movements suggested the current status of defensive operations. The pattern of emergency system failures painted a clear picture of how the pirate assault was progressing. More importantly, she was beginning to understand exactly what the pirates actually wanted. The breakthrough came when a group of terrified Dominion civilians arrived with reports that pirates had boarded the station in the administrative sectors. But, instead of simply killing or capturing everyone they encountered, the pirates were systematically accessing data terminals and downloading specific information. Elena excused herself briefly and found a quiet corner where she activated a small communication device that looked like a standard emergency transponder. She spoke quietly into it for less than 30 seconds before returning to refugee coordination. "Marcus," she said upon her return, "I need you to establish a secondary evacuation staging area in Section F. Captain Rodriguez, please coordinate with station security about establishing defensive positions around the civilian areas." "Ma'am," Rodriguez replied, "are you expecting the pirates to reach this far into the station?" Elena smiled with the same gentle warmth she had shown since arriving. "I think we should be prepared for all possibilities, don't you?" What she didn't say was that the communication device had just transmitted a coded message to a destination the galaxy's most sophisticated intelligence networks had never detected. A message that contained tactical assessments, pirate capabilities, and, most importantly, confirmation of what Elena had suspected from the moment the attack began. This wasn't a pirate raid at all. This was a carefully orchestrated operation designed to discredit the Galactic Council's military capabilities, steal specific classified information, and demonstrate that the galaxy's established powers were not as secure as they pretended to be. The question was whether the real enemy behind this operation understood that humanity's tender representative had just turned their own plan into an opportunity for a very different kind of demonstration. As explosions echoed closer and emergency lights flickered ominously, Elena Vasquez continued to help frightened refugees while conducting one of the most sophisticated intelligence operations in galactic history. The galaxy was about to learn what humans meant when they spoke of strength through compassion. But, first, they would need to survive what was coming next. The pirates breached the station's inner defensive perimeter at 0521 station time, just 18 minutes faster than Captain Rodriguez had predicted. Elena was helping a group of Nexus Collective children stabilize their crystalline matrices when the first sounds of close-quarters combat echoed through the civilian sectors. The defensive line held for exactly 47 minutes. Elena had just finished organizing the latest group of refugees when Marcus rushed to her side, his face pale with fear. "Elena, they're through. Station security is falling back to the last defensive positions. The military commanders are saying we have maybe 20 minutes before the pirates reach this area." Around them, the refugee population descended into panic once again. Species that had been working together moments before now reverted to their instinctual responses. Saurian families clustered into defensive formations with the younglings in the center. Zephyrian groups buzzed with rapid collective communications. The Nexus Collective representatives began calculating probability matrices for survival outcomes. Elena stood in the center of the chaos and did something that caught everyone's attention. She climbed onto a supply crate and spoke in a clear, calm voice that somehow carried over all the panic sounds around them. "Everyone, please listen to me for just a moment." The strange authority in her tone made beings across the area pause their panic and look toward her. "I know you're afraid. I know this situation seems hopeless. But, I need you to understand something important: you are not helpless, and you are not alone." A large Saurian warrior stepped forward, his scarred hide evidence of many battles. "Human, with respect, your species is known for optimism, not warfare. These pirates have defeated our finest military units. What can civilians do that trained soldiers could not?" Elena smiled at him with genuine warmth. "You're absolutely right that humans aren't known for warfare. We're known for something else entirely. We're known for surviving what should have killed us, and for protecting what matters most to us." She gestured to the mixed crowd around them. "Right now, what matters most is making sure everyone in this room lives to see tomorrow. And, I promise you, that is going to happen." The Nexus Collective representative's crystalline form pulsed with skeptical light. "Ambassador Vasquez, while we appreciate your confidence, our probability calculations show a 97.3% chance of capture or death once the pirates reach this location." "Those are impressive calculations," Elena acknowledged. "But, they're based on the assumption that we're going to wait here passively for something to happen to us." Captain Rodriguez stepped forward, and Elena noticed that he was no longer carrying the ceremonial weapons of a diplomatic escort. Instead, he held military-grade equipment that definitely hadn't been part of his original loadout. "Ma'am," he said formally, "permission to begin defensive preparations?" Elena nodded. "Permission granted, Captain." What happened next made every being in the refugee area realize they had fundamentally misunderstood who Elena Vesquez actually was. Rodriguez began issuing orders with the crisp efficiency of someone who had commanded troops in actual combat. Within minutes, he had identified every being in the area with any kind of military or security background. A Saurian engineer who had served in their planetary defense force. 3 Zephyrian drones who had collective link experience with military coordination. 2 Nexus collective technicians who had worked on weapons systems. Elena moved through the crowd with purposeful efficiency, no longer the gentle diplomat but someone conducting a tactical assessment of available resources and capabilities. She identified choke points in the area's architecture. She noted environmental systems that could be modified for defensive purposes. She evaluated sightlines and cover positions with the eye of someone who had studied combat in environments exactly like this one. "Marcus," she instructed, "I need you to access the station's maintenance systems and determine if we can selectively modify atmospheric controls in the approach corridors." "Elena, I don't understand. How do you know about tactical modifications of life support systems?" Elena paused in her preparations and looked at her aide with an expression of gentle regret. "Marcus, I'm afraid there are a few things about my background that weren't included in the standard diplomatic briefings." Before she could explain further, the sound of approaching combat grew significantly louder. Emergency barriers in the outer corridors were being breached with systematic efficiency. Elena activated her communication device again, this time speaking in what the universal translators rendered as standard human diplomatic language but which Captain Rodriguez clearly understood as something entirely different based on his immediate response. "Copy that, ma'am. Initiating Protocol 7. Rodriguez moved to what appeared to be a standard emergency supply locker and input a code sequence that opened a hidden compartment containing military equipment that definitely should not have existed on a diplomatic mission. The Saurian warrior who had spoken earlier watched this development with growing amazement. "Human Elena, you are not what you appeared to be." "No," Elena admitted, checking what appeared to be a standard emergency med kit but which clearly contained significantly more sophisticated equipment than medical supplies. "I'm afraid none of us are." She turned to address the entire refugee population again. "I need everyone to understand that the situation has changed. The beings attacking this station are not random pirates. They are a professionally organized military force conducting a specific operation designed to destabilize the Galactic Council's authority." Murmurs of shock and confusion rippled through the crowd. Furthermore, Elena continued, this operation was planned with inside assistance from someone with extensive knowledge of Council defenses and procedures. Someone wanted this attack to succeed, and they wanted the Council's military forces to appear weak and ineffective. A Dominion administrator stepped forward, his ancient features creased with worry. "Ambassador, how could you possibly know such things?" Elena's smile carried a different quality now, still warm, but with an edge that suggested depths the galaxy had not yet seen. "Because humanity has been tracking this conspiracy for the past 8 months. And because I am not actually a diplomatic specialist." The revelation hung in the air for a moment before the sound of approaching combat forced immediate practical concerns. "Captain Rodriguez," Elena ordered, "establish defensive positions at points Alpha through Delta. Saurian teams take positions Alpha and Beta. Your natural armor will help with direct confrontation. Zephyrian collective units coordinate positions Charlie and Delta. Your link communication will allow for tactical coordination. Nexus collective technicians, I need you monitoring all electronic systems for infiltration attempts." "Ma'am," Rodriguez acknowledged, "what about civilian evacuation?" Elena was checking a device that looked like a diplomatic scanner but was clearly something far more sophisticated. "There won't be an evacuation, Captain. The pirates have disabled all remaining escape systems." "But that's acceptable because evacuation was never the actual objective." The first pirate assault teams reached the civilian sector 17 minutes later, expecting to find a collection of terrified non-combatants huddled together waiting for capture. Instead, they encountered a carefully coordinated defensive operation that demonstrated tactical sophistication they had not anticipated. The Saurian positions provided heavy resistance at key choke points. The Zephyrian collective link allowed for instantaneous communication and tactical adjustment. The Nexus collective technicians countered every attempt to hack the station's remaining defensive systems. And, coordinating it all was the human ambassador who had seemed so naive and helpless just hours before. The first assault wave was repelled with efficiency that left the attacking force confused and regrouping in the outer corridors. Elena used the brief respite to make another communication on her device, this time speaking in a language that the universal translators couldn't process but which made Captain Rodriguez nod with grim satisfaction. "Ma'am," he reported, "confirmation received. Admiral Chen's battle group is 40 minutes out and has been tracking the real pirate fleet since they left hyperspace." The Saurian warrior stared at Elena with newfound respect. "Human Elena, you have been planning this engagement since before the attack began." "Actually," Elena replied, checking weapons systems with practiced efficiency, "we've been planning this since before I arrived at the station." Humanity knew this conspiracy existed. We knew someone was planning to use pirate forces to destabilize the Council. And we knew that the only way to identify and stop the real enemy was to let them believe their plan was working. She gestured to the defensive positions around them. "Every species in this room has just demonstrated tactical capabilities that the galaxy's military leaders claimed were impossible through civilian coordination. You've worked together, combined your natural abilities, and created a defensive operation that professional soldiers couldn't break." The implications were staggering. If randomly assembled civilians from different species could coordinate this effectively, what could their actual military forces accomplish with proper leadership and mutual respect? Elena activated a wall display that showed the tactical situation across the entire station. The pirate assault was designed to demonstrate that the Council's military forces were weak and divided. Instead, it's about to demonstrate exactly the opposite. On the display, icons representing arriving human ships appeared at the edge of the system. But these weren't just any human ships, they were Admiral Chen's battle group, consisting of vessels that had been tracking the pirate fleet since it departed its hidden base 3 days earlier. Elena turned to the mixed group of beings who had followed her tactical coordination with growing amazement. The conspiracy behind this attack includes members of the Galactic Council itself. Beings who believed that keeping different species divided and suspicious of each other was the best way to maintain their own power. She smiled with the expression of someone who had just revealed the final move in a very complex game. They were about to learn what happens when you underestimate not just humanity, but the potential for different species to work together when they have proper leadership and a common cause. The sound of approaching combat was growing louder again, but this time it carried a different quality. The pirates were no longer advancing with confident efficiency. They were fighting a desperate rearguard action against forces that were systematically dismantling their operation with embarrassing ease. Elena checked her communication device one final time. Admiral Chen reports that the pirate fleet is surrendering. Apparently, they decided they would rather face human military justice than continue fighting humans who had been expecting them. The revelation rippled through the refugee area as beings from dozens of species realized they had just witnessed something unprecedented in galactic history. The tender girl they had dismissed as naive had just orchestrated the most sophisticated counterintelligence operation any of them had ever seen. And she had done it while genuinely protecting every civilian in her care. But Elena Vasquez was not finished demonstrating what humanity brought to the galaxy. The real surprise was still to come. The final phase of the battle lasted exactly 11 minutes and 37 seconds. Elena knew this because she was monitoring every aspect of the engagement through tactical feeds that had been carefully positioned throughout the station during her supposedly naive diplomatic tour. Admiral Chen's battle group didn't simply defeat the pirate fleet, they dismantled it with a precision that demonstrated intimate knowledge of every ship's capabilities, every tactical doctrine the pirates employed, and every escape route they might attempt to use. The human fleet moved through space like they had been rehearsing this specific engagement for months. Because they had been. Elena stood in the Civilian Coordination Center, no longer maintaining the pretense of helpless diplomacy, coordinating what appeared to be a refugee protection operation but was actually one of the most complex military intelligence gathering missions in galactic history. Captain Rodriguez, she instructed, begin Phase 4 data collection. I want complete tactical assessments of how each species' military personnel performed under actual combat stress. Copy that, ma'am, Rodriguez replied, activating recording systems that had been carefully concealed as standard diplomatic equipment. The Saurian combat effectiveness exceeded baseline projections by 34% when operating in coordinated mixed species units. Elena nodded, making notes on what appeared to be refugee status reports but were actually detailed analyses of how different species' natural abilities could be integrated into combined tactical operations. And the Zephyrian collective link coordination? Impressive, ma'am. When they weren't trying to dominate the tactical situation, their ability to maintain real-time communication across multiple engagement zones was extraordinary. Around them, the beings who had participated in the defense were beginning to realize that their performance had been far superior to anything their species' military doctrines had suggested was possible. They had not only survived a professional military assault, they had actually contributed to defeating it. The Saurian warrior who had been skeptical of Elena's capabilities approached her with something approaching awe. Human Elena, your species planned this entire engagement to evaluate our combat potential? Elena looked up from her tactical reports with the same gentle expression she had worn throughout the crisis. Not exactly. We planned this engagement to save your lives and stop a conspiracy that threatened the stability of the entire Galactic Council. She gestured to the display showing the aftermath of the battle. Evaluating everyone's capabilities was a necessary part of ensuring the plan's success. But the primary objective was always protecting the innocent beings on this station. The distinction seemed important to her in a way that the other species found difficult to understand. Marcus approached her with a datapad, his expression a mixture of amazement and lingering confusion. Elena, I'm reading the preliminary reports from Admiral Chen's fleet. They captured not just the pirate forces, but also recovered intelligence data that indicates this conspiracy included members of the Galactic Council's Defense Committee. Elena accepted the datapad and reviewed it with the kind of focused attention that made it clear she was not surprised by any of the information it contained. 3 members of the Defense Committee, 2 representatives from the Trade Regulation Council, and 1 high administrator from the Diplomatic Corps. You knew? Marcus asked incredulously. We suspected, Elena corrected. The pattern of information leaks, the timing of certain policy decisions, the way specific intelligence was made available to criminal organizations, it all pointed to a coordinated effort to destabilize the Council's authority. She looked around at the mixed group of beings who had followed her tactical coordination during the crisis. What we didn't know was whether the ordinary citizens and military personnel of different species could actually work together effectively when properly motivated. The implications of that statement hung in the air as everyone realized what they had just participated in. Elena activated a communication channel that connected to the main assembly chamber, where the surviving council members were attempting to restore order after the devastating revelation of internal betrayal. Chancellor Vax, she said formally, Ambassador Vasquez requesting permission to address the council regarding the investigation results and tactical recommendations for preventing future conspiracy activities. The response came through with barely contained frustration. Ambassador Vasquez, while we appreciate humanity's assistance in this matter, the Council has its own procedures for handling internal security breaches. Elena's expression didn't change, but something in her tone suggested that Chancellor Vex might want to reconsider his dismissive approach. Of course, Chancellor. Though I should mention that humanity's investigation has uncovered evidence of conspiracy activities extending far beyond this single incident. Evidence that suggests systematic infiltration of Council operations over a period of several years. The communication channel remained silent for a long moment. Furthermore, Elena continued, our tactical analysis indicates that the defensive capabilities demonstrated today by mixed species coordination exceed anything currently contemplated in Council military doctrines. Perhaps the Council would be interested in reviewing these findings before making final determinations about future security procedures. When the response came, Chancellor Vex's tone carried a notable shift in attitude. Ambassador Vasquez, the Council would be grateful for your complete report on these matters. Perhaps you could address the Assembly when convenient? Elena smiled with the same gentle warmth she had shown since her arrival. Of course, Chancellor. Though I should mention that Admiral Chen will be joining us shortly to present the military intelligence findings. And Colonel Martinez from Human Strategic Intelligence will be providing the detailed conspiracy analysis. The revelation that Elena had been operating with full military intelligence support sent ripples of shock through the communication channel. Human strategic intelligence? Chancellor Vex's voice carried undertones of something approaching alarm. Oh yes, Elena replied cheerfully. Did I not mention that I'm actually Lieutenant Colonel Elena Vasquez, Human Space Force Intelligence Division? I suppose it slipped my mind during all the diplomatic activities. The silence that followed was profound. Captain Rodriguez, who was apparently also not exactly who he had appeared to be, handed Elena a complete tactical assessment of the station's defense operations. The document contained detailed analyses of every species' performance, recommendations for improved coordination protocols, and strategic assessments that demonstrated humanity had been conducting sophisticated intelligence gathering throughout the entire crisis. Elena reviewed the report with satisfaction. Excellent work, Captain. Please transmit these findings to Admiral Chen and request that he prepare a comprehensive briefing on the conspiracy network's full extent. She turned to address the assembled beings who had participated in the defense. I owe all of you an apology for the deception involved in this operation. But I want you to understand that every action we took was designed to protect lives and preserve the stability of the Galactic Council. The Nexus Collective representative's crystalline form pulsed with what her translator rendered as thoughtful consideration. Lieutenant Colonel Vasquez, your species conducted this operation with remarkable precision. But why maintain the pretense of diplomatic naivety? Why not simply reveal your military capabilities from the beginning? Elena's answer revealed the fundamental difference between humanity's approach to galactic relations and that of every other species they had encountered. Because the galaxy respects military strength but fears it. If we had arrived as obvious military representatives, every species would have immediately begun calculating how to neutralize the threat we represented. They would never have allowed us to learn about their actual capabilities or their willingness to cooperate. She gestured to the successful defensive operation around them. But, by appearing harmless and naive, we created an environment where everyone could demonstrate their true potential without feeling threatened or competitive. The Saurian warrior nodded slowly. You allowed us to show strength without requiring us to prove dominance. Exactly, Elena confirmed. And now the Council has empirical evidence that mixed species cooperation can achieve tactical results that exceed what any single species could accomplish alone. What Elena didn't mention was that humanity's long-term strategy for galactic integration was far more sophisticated than even this operation revealed. The conspiracy they had uncovered and defeated had been only one part of a comprehensive assessment of galactic political stability. Over the next several hours, as Admiral Chen's forces secured the station and processed the captured conspirators, Elena continued her dual role as protective coordinator and intelligence analyst. She ensured that every civilian received appropriate medical attention and psychological support while simultaneously compiling one of the most detailed assessments of galactic military capabilities ever assembled. The other species watched her work with growing amazement as they realized the scope of what humanity had accomplished. Elena had not only prevented a major conspiracy from destabilizing the Galactic Council, she had done it while genuinely caring for the welfare of every being under her protection. When Chancellor Vex finally arrived to personally escort Elena to the emergency council session, he found her helping a group of Zephyrian younglings reconnect with their family collective link networks. Lieutenant Colonel Vasquez, he said with considerably more respect than he had shown the naive diplomat who had arrived days earlier, the council is prepared to hear your complete report. Elena finished her work with the younglings, ensuring they were safely reunited with their families, before turning to face the Chancellor with the same gentle smile she had maintained throughout the entire crisis. Thank you, Chancellor. Though I should mention that our report includes some recommendations that the Council may find challenging to its current operational paradigms. As they walked toward the assembly chamber, Elena reflected on the fact that the galaxy was about to learn the most important lesson humanity had to offer. Sometimes the most dangerous predator is the one that chooses not to hunt until it absolutely has to. And, when it finally does hunt, it does so with a precision and purpose that reflects careful preparation and genuine commitment to protecting what matters most. The tender girl had revealed herself to be humanity's perfect representative, someone capable of extraordinary violence when necessary, but who genuinely preferred the harder path of building something better. Now came the truly difficult part, convincing the galaxy that cooperation was more powerful than conquest. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened 18 hours after the last pirate ship surrendered to Admiral Chen's battle group. The Great Assembly Chamber bore visible scars from the recent battle, scorched bulkheads, emergency repair patches, and the lingering smell of burned electronics that reminded everyone how close they had come to complete disaster. Elena entered the chamber in her actual uniform for the first time since arriving at the station. The insignia of a lieutenant colonel in Human Space Force intelligence was clearly visible, along with commendation ribbons that indicated extensive combat experience and specialized training that no one had suspected she possessed. But what drew the most attention was not her military bearing or her credentials. It was the fact that she entered accompanied by representatives from every species that had participated in the defense of the civilian sectors. Saurians walked beside Zephyrians in a display of mutual respect that would have been unthinkable days earlier. Nexus collective crystalline forms pulsed in harmonious synchronization with beings they had previously considered incompatible. Chancellor Vex called the assembly to order with considerably more humility than he had shown in their previous interactions. Lieutenant Colonel Vasquez, the Council is prepared to receive your complete report on the conspiracy investigation and the tactical recommendations developed during the recent crisis. Elena stood at the center of the assembly chamber, but she did not stand alone. The mixed species group that had fought together arranged themselves around her in a formation that spoke louder than any words about the bonds that had been forged under fire. Honored council members, Elena began, her voice carrying the same gentle warmth that had characterized her throughout the crisis. Before I present the intelligence findings, I believe it's important to address the fundamental assumptions that made this conspiracy possible. She activated a holographic display that showed the structure of the Galactic Council itself, layer upon layer of species-specific hierarchies, rigid territorial boundaries, and defensive postures that prioritized individual power over collective security. For millennia, the Council has operated on the principle that stability comes from carefully balanced mutual suspicion. Each species maintains its own sphere of influence, its own military doctrines, its own intelligence networks. Cooperation has been limited to formal treaties and controlled interactions that minimize the risk of any species gaining advantage over others. Murmurs of acknowledgement rippled through the assembly. This was, indeed, how galactic civilization had operated for longer than most species maintained historical records. This system, Elena continued, created the exact conditions that allowed the conspiracy to flourish. When species don't really trust each other, when they don't understand each other's capabilities, when they prioritize individual security over collective strength, it becomes impossible to recognize threats that exploit those very divisions. General Korthak, his ceremonial armor bearing new scars from the recent battle, stood to address her. Lieutenant Colonel Vasquez, while we appreciate humanity's analysis, this system has maintained galactic peace for thousands of years. What alternative do you propose? Elena smiled at him with genuine warmth. General, I propose that we demonstrate the alternative rather than simply discussing it. She gestured to the mixed species group around her. 18 hours ago, these beings were strangers to each other, divided by species loyalty and cultural misunderstanding. Under attack, they chose to trust each other, to combine their natural abilities, and to fight together for a common cause. The display shifted to show tactical analyses of the defense operations. Detailed metrics demonstrated that the mixed species coordination had achieved results that exceeded what any single species' military doctrine would have predicted. Saurian defensive instincts combined with Zephyrian collective communication and Nexus collective technical analysis created a tactical capability that was greater than the sum of its parts, Elena explained. But, more importantly, it created bonds of trust and mutual respect that no treaty or formal agreement could ever establish. The implications were staggering, and every being in the assembly chamber could see them. If randomly assembled civilians could achieve this level of coordination, what could properly trained and equipped military forces accomplish? Admiral Chen, who had arrived during the night to coordinate the final stages of the conspiracy investigation, stepped forward to present the military intelligence findings. Honored council members, he said in the crisp, formal tone of a professional military officer, the conspiracy network we uncovered included 15 high-ranking officials across 7 different species governments. Their objective was not simply to destabilize the council, but to create conditions for a complete restructuring of galactic civilization under their control. The details that followed painted a picture of systematic manipulation that had been operating for decades. Financial corruption, military intelligence leaks, strategic resource manipulation, even the orchestration of minor conflicts between species to maintain the atmosphere of mutual suspicion that the conspiracy required. However, Admiral Chen continued, the most significant finding from our investigation is not the extent of the conspiracy, but the fact that it was only possible because each species' intelligence and security apparatus operated in complete isolation from all others. Elena resumed her presentation as the assembly absorbed the magnitude of the threat they had unknowingly faced. Humanity's intelligence services have been tracking elements of this conspiracy for 8 months. But we couldn't act on our findings because we lacked the detailed knowledge of how other species' security systems functioned. She activated another display showing the complex coordination that had been required for the successful counter-operation. The only way to defeat this threat was to create genuine cooperation between species who had never worked together before. Not formal cooperation based on treaties and diplomatic protocols, but actual operational trust based on shared experience and mutual dependency. Chancellor Vax, who had been remarkably quiet throughout the presentation, finally spoke. Lieutenant Colonel Vasquez, you are suggesting that humanity orchestrated this entire crisis to force the Council toward greater integration. Elena's expression didn't change, but something in her tone suggested that Chancellor Vex might want to be very careful about the implications of his question. Chancellor, humanity prevented this crisis by identifying and responding to an existing conspiracy that threatened the survival of galactic civilization. The fact that our response demonstrated the benefits of genuine cooperation was a consequence of effective crisis management, not manipulation. The distinction was important, and everyone in the chamber understood exactly why. Admiral Chan provided additional clarification. The pirate attack would have occurred whether humanity was present or not. The conspiracy had been in motion for years before we detected it. Our intervention prevented what intelligence projections indicated would have been the complete collapse of the Galactic Council's authority. Elena gestured again to the mixed species group that surrounded her. But the most important result of this operation was not the conspiracy's defeat. It was the demonstration that beings from different species can trust each other, fight together, and create something stronger than what any of them could achieve alone. The Saurian warrior who had participated in the defense stepped forward to address the assembly. Honored council members, I have served in the Empire's military for 30 years. I have never experienced coordination and mutual support like what occurred during this crisis. The human leader earned our trust through competence and genuine concern for our welfare. The Zephyrian collective representative harmonized agreement. The defensive operation succeeded because differences between species became sources of strength rather than division. Human tactical thinking combined with Saurian courage and collective coordination created capabilities that none of our individual military doctrines had contemplated. A Nexus collective civilian engineer added her crystalline voice to the testimonials. Lieutenant Colonel Vasquez demonstrated that effective leadership means understanding how to help others achieve their full potential, not forcing them to subordinate their abilities to a single vision. Elena listened to these testimonials with the expression of someone who genuinely cared about the beings she had led through the crisis. When the chamber fell silent, she addressed the council with the same gentle firmness that had characterized her throughout the entire operation. Honored council members, humanity requests permission to establish a joint species tactical coordination institute. A facility where military and civilian personnel from different species can train together, learn each other's capabilities, and develop the kind of operational trust that proved so effective during this crisis. The proposal hung in the air as council members contemplated its implications. Furthermore, Elena continued, humanity offers to share all of our intelligence gathering and analysis capabilities with a truly integrated council security apparatus. Not through formal information sharing agreements, but through direct operational cooperation that would make future conspiracies virtually impossible. Chancellor Vex struggled with the decision that everyone could see coming. The evidence was overwhelming. the demonstration of effectiveness was undeniable. The threat of future conspiracies was too significant to ignore. But, accepting humanity's proposal would mean fundamentally changing how galactic civilization had operated for millennia. Elena seemed to understand his hesitation. Chancellor, the conspiracy we just defeated was successful for decades because they understood something the Council didn't. Individual strength means nothing when your enemies are willing to work together. She gestured to the mixed species group around her one final time. These beings chose to trust each other when their lives depended on it. They discovered that cooperation doesn't mean weakness or loss of identity. It means becoming stronger than any of them could be alone. The vote, when it came, was not unanimous. Several species abstained, and a few voted against the proposal out of traditional concerns about maintaining independence. But the majority of the Council, influenced by the testimonials of beings who had actually experienced mixed species cooperation under combat stress, voted to establish what would become known as the Galactic Integration Initiative. Elena Vasquez, the tender girl who had arrived as a seemingly naive diplomat, had accomplished something that centuries of formal diplomacy had failed to achieve. She had given the galaxy a practical demonstration of what they could become if they chose cooperation over suspicion. As the council session concluded and Elena prepared to begin the complex work of establishing humanity's new role in galactic civilization, she reflected on the fact that the most important battles are not won through superior firepower or tactical brilliance. They are won by convincing others that they can be stronger than they ever imagined, and that the future they build together can be better than anything they could achieve alone. The tender girl had revealed her true strength, not the ability to destroy enemies, but the wisdom to transform them into allies. In the years that followed, as the Galactic Integration Initiative grew into the foundation for a new era of interspecies cooperation, historians would mark Elena's arrival at the Council Station as the moment when galactic civilization chose to evolve beyond its ancient limitations. But Elena herself remembered it more simply as the day she helped a group of frightened beings discover they could trust each other when it mattered most. And that, she knew, was the most important victory of all.